Richard is a Rotarian from Gainesville, Florida. He is an entrepreneur whose companies have spanned technology, electronics, medical devices, and biologics. In 2004, Richard and his wife, Susan, joined friends and fellow Rotarians in co-founding Sustainable Cambodia. I actually met Richard in Miami about 7 years ago at a wedding for one of the co-founders, Bruce Lasky, who was a friend of my husband, Ed O'Brien. Ed was the founder of street law at Georgetown Law, and Bruce wanted to take street law to Asia. Bruce was the co-founder of Sustainable Cambodia as well. But Richard and Susan brought it up to the next level, incorporating Rotary's ideals of empowerment and service, where only native Cambodians are employed as paid staff and all other non-Cambodians are paid volunteers, like Rotarians who come in for a week or 2 weeks or several months to volunteer in Cambodia. Through this unique model, Sustainable Cambodia works with the families in rural Cambodian villages to help them achieve sustainability and self-sufficiency through clean water, agriculture, income generation, and schools. Now, this is a model that the Rotary Foundation loves. It's community-driven, it's sustainable, measurable, and has high impact. And most important of all, it's run by local Rotarians in partnership with the villages that are being served. So Richard has received the Service Above Self Award, Rotary's highest honor, for his humanitarian work in Cambodia. Since 2004, Sustainable Cambodia's unique empowerment model has helped thousands of Cambodian families and children to rebuild their lives, many still affected by the Khmer Rouge genocide. So I turn it over to you, Richard. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for that great introduction, May, and thanks everybody for letting me be here today and present with you. Your club sounds really terrific. May gave you some background on the way we got started with Sustainable Cambodia, and just to expound on that a little bit, we are a separate 501c3, so we're a nonprofit. Our board of directors is made up of Rotarians and long-term volunteers that have been there, for many times in the past. Everybody's a volunteer on the international side, as May said, which means that every dollar that we all put into this winds up actually going directly into the projects themselves instead of going into international overhead and the like. We do have staff on the ground, which is incredibly necessary, and they're fantastic. And I'll give you some background later on how they have developed over the 18 to 20 years that we've been doing this. It's been a long-term project, and it's become really intergenerational. So just background quickly on where we work in Cambodia. As you can see, Cambodia is kind of squeezed in between Thailand and Vietnam. We work primarily in the center of the country around that big lake that you see in the middle called the Tonle Sap. And we have several schools around the Tonle Sap. May didn't get a chance to visit those when you came. We pretty much isolate ourselves within that little square there when folks come to visit, because everything's centrally located. But within that region, we're working with dozens and dozens of villages and have dozens and dozens of community schools and preschools and the like, all of which I'll explain as we get further into this. I'm sure everybody in the club, you guys being a really international focused club, you know about the Khmer Rouge. So the aftermath of that genocide, and it was an odd genocide in the sense that it was, as you know, undertaken to return the country back to what they considered year zero, back to where they wanted to eliminate everybody from the country that had any kind of education, any kind of Western influence. Anybody that spoke a foreign language was either interned or put to death. anyone who was, even if they wore glasses, they were often put to death. They basically just wanted to get the country back to, founding just villagers. And unfortunately, as part of that, they also moved everybody around and relocated people into different areas. So what you wound up with was displaced families all over the country. Obviously, no educated adults. In fact, the families have really not learned how to grow rice well, as odd as that sounds there. The daily life in Cambodia is impacted by the fact that the climate there, you go through a series of about 2 to 3 to 4 months of monsoon where the rains are just constant and there's water every place, and literally everything that you see in front of you there would be flooded. And then you go through another 3 or 4 months of complete dry season, which is what you're seeing in the photo here, when all that water dries up. So it makes it difficult. It also makes it difficult in an agricultural sense to know what's going to wind up growing and how long it's going to grow. The families, especially when we first arrived 20 years ago, the children were the ones that brought the water. The local water sources were either polluted ponds, scummy ponds that were, maybe 15 minutes to 30 minutes away, or in some cases, they would be able to walk a couple of hours with water from a well someplace. And the families needed the kids to work in the schools, to work in the fields, which prevented them from being able to get to school. And malnutrition was really rampant because both mother and father needed to work to get what little bit of agriculture income they could generate. Basically, the young kids wound up having to raise the younger kids in the family. So that was the environment in which we wound up trying to start Sustainable Cambodia. And we were really focused when we did this on the Rotary empowerment model. We wanted this to be about the village families, not us coming in and rescuing them and telling them this is what they need to do or doing it for them, but actually empowering the families themselves to make a lasting change. And the way we've done that is primarily through a combination of water projects, agriculture projects, and schools and education. The way we got Rotary involved in this was initially, it was about 3 years after we had started trying to do this that my club first got involved. And this trip in 2005, this photo is from our very first Rotary trip. This is Tim Sorrell from our club here in Gainesville, who's the videographer for the University of Florida football teams. And so he wound up coming in, and of course the kids were really enamored of all the videos, being able to see all of his computer equipment and his camera equipment. And as part of that, he wound up wanting to do a presentation for the local community about Rotary. And when we got to the part about, he's talking about how it's worldwide, and there's all these clubs and all of this, and then he got to the component of service above self. And when he said service above self, and remember, a lot of this was being translated, the translator and everybody around him was just affixed. They somehow they just lit up about service above self. They really got it and really connected. And over the next 6 months, we wound up helping them to create the first Rotary Club in rural Cambodia. Until then, there were 2 other clubs that were both Phnom Penh or Siem Reap, and they were both basically expat clubs. So this was the first truly Cambodian Rotary Club in Cambodia. So over the next probably 3 to 4 to 5 years, as we're starting to work these projects and figure out how we're going to, we're working with the villages and getting more and more projects done and working with the Rotary Club of Posat, we wound up connecting with so many Rotary clubs around the world. We had Australian Rotarians that came through visiting. We had Canadian Rotarians that came through visiting, New York Rotarians, Utah Rotarians, more Gainesville Rotarians. So we had all these different clubs that wound up just touring through Cambodia and connecting with us. And then they would start being involved in projects. And then they would spread the word to other clubs. So today we have I've more than 120 clubs around the world that have been part of the project to date. Probably 35–40% of those Australian clubs. So really, really an international aspect of this. So back quickly to how we kind of accomplish this in the villages, and this has really evolved as a model on this empowerment model, is that there are two primary aspects of it. One is community development, the other is the education side. We didn't know originally that we were really going to focus on education. We were thinking we were going to be doing mostly community development. But the village families, especially the women in the families, in the very first development committee meeting in the very first village, they all raised their hands and said, one of the most important things we need is we need somebody to watch our children while we're working in the fields. And so preschools became a big component of this. But within those two areas, community development, it is basically the empowerment training of the village development committees, and then it hovers around water and sanitation, agriculture, so they can generate enough income to be able to keep their kids in school. And then on the education side, we have preschools in the villages, which feed into smaller community schools. And those go into larger enrichment schools that work side by side with the state and government schools. And then we have university scholarships for the students that graduate from these little rural villages and they go to Cambodian university. So I'll just walk you through, if I could, a few scenes from within the villages so you'll have a feel for what this is like. May, of course, you've been there, so you recognize a lot of these types of scenes. This was one of our very first village development groups and one of our very first village development meetings. It's not atypical of the way that these start when you go into a village the first time. The wells, a lot of the wells wind up looking like this. The wells are organized by the village families. The actual contractor is paid for by the Sustainable Cambodia project or by the Rotary grant that's involved. But the families get all this training in how to maintain the pumps, and their village development committees actually raise the money to be able to keep the pumps working. Many of the families wind up installing biosand filters. These are built on site. Biosand filters, a really creative design, came from a Canadian Rotary club in Calgary, Canada. And it works basically, as you can see in the schematic, with local materials. So it's all local, built on site, doesn't require plastics and all this stuff that would be brought in from outside. So it's very sustainable. We have a real emphasis on latrines. This happens to be a latrine for a school, so it's very nice. And rooftop rainwater harvesting, those two tanks beside that school, those hold about 4,000 liters each. So they'll capture all the water during the rainy season and allow it to be used during the dry season. We have animal pass-on programs for agriculture, which are based on Heifer International's project and programs. And those allow the donor families the families divide up into self-help groups. Within the self-help groups, one family will get a breeding pair of animals, and then they pledge that when they have progeny from those animals, they'll pass them on to the other members of the self-help group. Those members pledge the same thing, so it replicates and keeps growing and spreading. But it also empowers the families because they become donor families themselves, and there's a big ceremony involved in when these pass-ons are done. The agriculture program is an incredibly important part of this because the families have to be able to generate enough income to keep their kids in school. And so we have a whole series of trainings for them on how to grow alternative crops that are important for the local market, how to get those crops to market, and we provide seed and some of the tools and equipment that they would need to be able to grow the agriculture. So back on this phase, so that's mostly the community development side of things on the top of the slide. On the education side, down at the bottom, like I say, we start with preschools, and most of the villages have a preschool in them, or perhaps two of the villages together will combine and have a preschool for the younger kids. In those preschools, we provide hot meals for the kids. And those are provided for by the village mothers who volunteer their time and put in the hot meal work. These lead into community schools, and these are really small schools that are in the villages themselves, but they go up through at least grades 3 and 4. So they get them a little beyond the preschool, and there's a real focus on creativity, on a different type of learning environment and a real social learning environment that you just don't see in standard, perhaps across most of Asia, but certainly across Cambodia. So it really results in a tremendous opportunity for these kids. And these are incredibly joyful classrooms, as May would be able to attest. When you walk into one of these, the kids are just alive with enthusiasm. And they get training across the spectrum, including health and nutrition, in food and sanitation, how to prepare that. The libraries are a really important part of each of our main schools, where the kids really have a big access to books and things that they can do. And then all of these little community schools and the like lead to our larger enrichment schools. And within the area that you saw in that little square box, we have 3 major enrichment schools. And then we have 5 others around the perimeter of the large lake in the middle of Cambodia. And these enrichment schools are the ones that will ultimately allow the kids to get a scholarship and go on to university. So these are going to be grades 5 through 12, probably, typically. And these are remarkable schools. Kids get opportunities to, interact with computers. We have dormitories in some of the schools for the girls that live too far away to be able to get to and from school. So they stay there during the week and go home on the weekends. In each of those schools, we have youth clubs, and the youth clubs are based on Rotary. So they're essentially like an Interact club. They're just not branded as Interact. And that's simply because when we first started them, we didn't think we'd brand them as Interact, but they have the same Rotary rotating leadership model, and they're based on service above self, and they're based on the 4-way test. And they do all sorts of community service projects and school projects. And these are really, these kids, when you go over and visit with us, these kids will be the ones that are actually leading the tours and things. They do so much of the work. It's incredible. From those, in fact, the slide's a little old now. I think we are approaching 500 kids that have now gone on from these villages to Cambodian University under the scholarships from Sustainable Cambodia. So, and this happens to be a shot that is a mix of one of our trips with Rotarians from all over the world on our trip, and the other half of the group is some of the Phnom Penh University students that were attending university in Phnom Penh at that time. So again, this is kind of the model. It's wrapped around empowerment, education, community service, family income, all to generate a sustainable change. And what we've learned is this really is generational. When we started this, we thought, gosh, this might be something that will take 5 or 10 years. It has taken at least 15 years because what's happened is we had to have kids that were 5, 6, 7 years old that have now gone on. They're either seniors in high school or they've gone on to university, and in many cases they have come back and are part of our program. So it's really a generational change, which starts with the preschools, with all the training that happens in the preschools, through the community schools, through the larger schools where they get exposed to all of this information and material. They just grow incredibly. And I should have mentioned earlier that we have this incredible emphasis also on women. We always have at least 50% of all the students in the programs are going to be girls. So this happens to be a shot of one sponsor who sponsors all of these girls. And the youth clubs are a huge element in what takes place in the sustainability of this program, because they really model the behavior for the younger kids and become mentors. With 16 or probably now 17 generations of university scholars that have moved on. And I should mention here, I'm not sure where I mentioned this, if I do, that of our staff in Cambodia, more than 50% of our staff now are returning graduates who went through our programs, started as little kids, went through grade school, graduated, went to university on the scholarships, and have come back, including, like in this shot over on the far left, Lisa on the far left is like our very, I think she was our first or our second university student. So we've just had a lot of them. So the whole program is based on empowerment, women being empowered. The women are a huge part of what takes place in every village and every village development committee. They really lead these projects. The families being empowered to do this work themselves and to plan the projects and to oversee them so that they are sustainable. The young people being empowered, and really Rotarians too. When you get a chance to go visit and be part of this, you feel empowered as well when you get in and get to do this. May, this probably looks familiar to you. This is when you're getting off and walking in for the very first time to one of the school campuses, and there's a long line of kids that are greeting you coming in. It's always emotional. So that's those are the underlying, it's the underlying program itself. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of questions. There's a lot of things that I didn't catch or cover, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. So I'll open it up.
Visiting opportunities. Can you expand on that? And how often do you have visiting Rotarians, and what is the process like, et cetera? Yeah,
absolutely. So we have always traditionally made 1 or 2 trips a year with Rotarians, and the numbers in the groups are usually between 30 and 40 Rotarians that go with us on each trip. And then, of course, when we hit, I think May was on, maybe almost the last one was in 2020, May. Yes, right. And
last one before COVID struck.
Yes, right. So on your trip, literally, when we were on the way out at the end of COVID, and in our case, we had to fly through Seoul. And as we went through Seoul, they were just locking South Korea down, and everybody was masked, and they were taking temperature from everybody in the place. And it was pretty wild. So we've had a hiatus now of, going on 3 years. And we have a new trip planned for January 26th, 27th of 2023. And we just opened it up this last 2 weeks, I think, for people to actually sign up with, and we're already booked at about 70 people. So thankfully, about a third of those folks are folks that have been there 2 or 3 times before with us as Rotarians. So they're going to be able to just go straight on out and get involved in the projects. So we'll have a manageable group of folks that we get to bring in as newbies. But if anybody's interested in being on the list, my email address, and I should have it on this slide, I don't. It's US office. US office will get to me. US office and it's sustainablecambodia.org, that you see at the bottom of the screen. So if anybody wants to email me at usoffice@sustainablecambodia.org, what I'll do is put you either on a standby list or at least on the 2024 list, and we can keep you posted. We also have Rotarians that visit just when they're going to be going to Asia, or they're planning a trip to Asia, or maybe they just want to make a trip on their own. And anytime that happens, if you're anywhere in Southeast Asia and you have time to be able to make a quick trip to either Siem Reap, where Angkor Wat is, or to Phnom Penh, capital, from either location, we can coordinate with you to be able to have you then travel. It's about 3 to 4 hours down a highway, either direction, to where our projects are. And the Rotarians at the Rotary Club of Passat and the youth club, or one of the youth clubs, will wind up, taking you around, spending time with you. You can spend as many days there as you would like, either just seeing things, or you can get involved in doing some of the projects with the families and with the kids. So please don't think that you're just limited to going over when there's a tour involved. But they really are fascinating.
I was just wondering if the Ministry of Education in Cambodia provides any funding for preschool or any of the education programs.
That's a great question. No, they don't. They don't. We have to be registered with the Ministry of Education, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with the Ministry of the Interior for the community development projects and agriculture, actually with the Ministry of Agriculture as well. So we're registered with all those ministries, and they have a 5-year plan from us, and they're very supportive of us in a heart sense. But financially, we get no support at all from them. The state schools are actually getting better and better, and are pretty good. But what happens is, on the elementary school for grades 1 through 6, the kids only go half a day. And so our supplemental schools have the kids basically fill up the other half of the day. So they get all of this supplemental education, plus all the social interaction and creativity and reading and all that exposure that they don't get in the state school. And then when they get into more of the junior high school age range, our supplemental school, it's usually the kids will take either 2 or 3 classes after school. So the school gets out around 3 or so in the afternoon, and they will stay with us from maybe 3 until 6. Doing various classes. So that's, so the government's doing a pretty good job of putting its money into education itself and trying to pay teachers. And what we're doing is supplemental to that. Great question, Ome.
Okay, so my question is, how do you think, I looked up some of the information about Cambodia and some of the challenges they're facing. And one of the biggest I saw and found was that there's a big problem with unwanted pregnancy and HIV, et cetera. So not that we're getting into this that much, but I just wanted to see how you've seen that impacting your program or other women and girls there in Cambodia, as well as any kind of sexual violence.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, out in the rural villages where we work, we do all of our work in the rural villages. So there's a pretty, so there are displaced families basically that maybe especially 20 years ago, there was a lot of migration from the rural villages into Phnom Penh, for instance, into the big city. And they would go there thinking there was going to be opportunity, but there turned out not to be really opportunity. And so those, you wind up with a lot of problems culturally from those displaced family and displaced kids. What our focus was in the rural villages, and then the second aspect is, there were a lot of recruiters that would come through village by village by village and recruit the kids with the families to have their children go off to great jobs in Singapore or great jobs in Bangkok or whatever. And they would explain all this stuff to them. And the kids were being sold into often the sex trade. So our answer to all of that, and this came through one of our very first Rotary grants, was a big program to do education through all the state schools in our area and in all of our schools that we were setting up, on educating the families in the villages on how not to fall victim to either recruitment of your kids and or to think that you're going to have a better life if you pull up stakes and go to Phnom Penh. So, and that involved a lot of stories and storytelling, and, it's all done by other Cambodians. So it's not like we're outsiders telling them this. So that's been really, really effective. So in the villages in which we work and all the villages around us that are influenced by us, there really isn't very much of that, very, very little displacement. There's no recruitment, I don't think, that ever takes place. And the sexual mores are pretty strong in Cambodia. So we don't have much in the rural villages of AIDS and sexual disease or that kind of thing. and keep in mind, of course, we have a big component of our health and education program. The kids are aware of how this works. It's age appropriate, but you know, that's all part of the education process as well in terms of health and sanitation.
Well, thank you so much for your work.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, those of us who served in the Peace Corps, and we actually were affiliated with a government agency, and I did community development, rural community development, and was involved in education at a local school. So I'm just wondering, how do the Cambodian officials view your program, and are you able to interact in a meaningful way with specific government agencies as relates to your development work and your education work?
Yeah, so I would say that we are probably very helpful to the government in some of their outreach areas. They're really trying to help improve the quality of life in the villages for the families that are dependent upon agriculture. So they like very much the kinds of programs that we're running that teach alternative agriculture, how to generate much more income from what they're doing and do it sustainably without artificial chemicals and the like.
Mm-hmm.
So they like that. I think they've emulated it to some degree. So I think we probably helped to get some replication of the model through the government ministry folks that are out doing similar work, if you will. I don't think that we probably get any tangible help, if you will, from the ministries in those areas. It's probably more us helping them than it is the other way around. But that's not because of any animosity between us.
Okay.
Anyway, they're very open, and I think they're very positive about what we're doing. We've tried very, very, very hard to not be political over there. You have to be pretty careful not to be political in Cambodia, because if you're critical of the current government, you can definitely wind up on the wrong side of the ledger.
Do you have a local team, paid or unpaid staff for actual implementation of these projects?
Yes, our local team is all paid staff. So we have about 100 and I think, gosh, I should know exactly what the number is, but as a board member, I think we're probably around 120 staff, and all paid staff. Now that includes folks that are part-time teachers, it includes full-time teachers, and it includes our community development staff. Our community development staff is broken up into agricultural staff and health and sanitation staff, and then of course we have accounting and the like as well. So, but like I said earlier, more than 50% of our team now, of those paid staff members, are started out with us in the program as children and went on to graduate grade 12 and got a scholarship to go to Cambodian University on our scholarship program, and then have returned and are now part of our staff. So we've really kind of intergenerationally built our own staff team. So that's really helpful because they are all completely committed to service above self and the 4-way test. And by the way, the 4-way test, I wish we could somehow find a way to have the 4-way test just lead the entire world. Because if every government locally, regionally, and nationally across the entire planet were to if everybody just used the 4-way test,
Wow.
the world would just be amazing.
Are there not local club Rotarians overseeing, are involved in the project?
Are they doing what?
We have so many Rotary clubs in Cambodia now. Are there not local councillors, local Rotarians involved into this project?
Oh yeah. So in the Rotary Club of Passat, the Rotary Club of Passat is the main club that's involved in this. and still to this day, the Rotary Club of Passat, I believe, is the only club in Cambodia that isn't made up of mostly expats. I wish Cambodia had more clubs like the Rotary Club of Passat, but at this point, there's a sister club that they started in Battambang, and I think the Battambang club is also similar to the Passat club. So maybe those two clubs are the only ones that are like that. But it's mostly the Rotary Club of Passat Rotarians who are involved in overseeing the projects from a Rotary perspective. We have at any given time, we probably have 3 Rotary global grants going on. And those, the 3 kind of interface with each other. The models that we use for almost all the global grants are really similar models. We're basically choosing either 1 or 2 or 3 new villages that have had a year's worth of pre-training on what's going to be involved in organizing and doing all their projects. And then the grants will be usually a 2 to 3 year grant program. And then at the end of that 2 to 3 year grant program, there's another 3 years that is outside of the grant, but that's funded through other Rotarians around the world and just non-global grant project money that helps to be sure that it stays sustainable in the follow-up. So it's probably a 6 to 7 year program in each village, with at least 1 global grant being central to that village.
Out of all the things that you've been doing, and it's extensive and very impressive how you've been really structuring this and giving the pre-education and pre-training to the community before you even go in and try to set up your project. That's brilliant. But looking at the work that you're doing, we'll call this empowerment projects. What would you say are the top 3 things that come to mind that really separate you out and has built this foundation for success? Because this is really sustainable, it's innovative and resilient. It's all 3 things, and it's quite impressive. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm not sure that I'll be able to nail all 3 things or get it down to 3 things, but I'd say that the most important aspects of all of this are, first, of course, that we're not doing for them. That they're doing the work themselves, and it's not that we go in and we say, here's the project plan, you guys do the work. I mean, they literally create the project plan themselves. They get a chance in a village to speak with other villages that have recently done it or have done it for many, many years and are now graduate villages, so that they know what kind of experiences those villages have had, and they get new ideas from them. And then by the end of that pre-planning year, they've really come up with their own project plan. So that's the first thing, is that it's about them doing, not us doing. I think the second thing is that it's long-term. There's such a focus often on wanting to get something done in a year's time or 2 years. And you go, okay, we have 2 years, and at the end of the 2 years, we have to have all this happen.
Right.
And then hands off the steering wheel, we're gone. So that doesn't work in these situations. You've got to be able to have a good solid 6 or 7 years that you really keep your hands gently on the wheel, at least for the last 3 or 4 years that the project is running. So having a structure where it can be longer term that way. And I'd say the third element is also about focus, but it's actually the lack of focus. So many organizations want to say, we're about water, safe water, or we're about child safety and education, or we're about sanitation. And they want to focus because it's much easier as an organization to just focus on one area, right? It's complicated when you've got to have all these things intermesh, but it doesn't work. When we first visited Cambodia, we would walk from village to village to village, and I can't tell you how many villages we would visit that would have 3 or 4 wells in them, totally broken, totally dry, non-functional. Some organization had come through and had spent money to put wells in because that was their focus, was water, and none of them worked.
Yeah.
So it's got to be, you've got to hit all the areas. You've got to have the families have the income. to be able to sustain themselves. They've got to have the knowledge about sanitation and water, and they have to have the kids taken care of. So it all works together. So
Yeah.
lack of focus.
Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. And on behalf of the Rotary Club of Washington, D.C., I'm presenting this certificate in honor of you speaking to our club today, recognizing your appearance. And we will be planting a tree in your honor. And now we're so sophisticated that we have GPS coordinates. So as soon as we know which tree is yours, we'll send you that information along with our tree planting ceremony when we do it next spring.
It's great. We love the trees in Washington, D.C. We do when we visit. They're beautiful. So that's great.